Success had given Marcus Wellington everything he thought he wanted: private jets, penthouse apartments, and business deals worth millions. But nothing had prepared him for seeing his ex-wife at JFK Airport with twin boys who shared his distinctive cleft chin and the same way of tilting their heads when curious. Marcus Wellington sat in the first-class lounge at JFK Airport, reviewing last-minute changes on his tablet. The papers he would sign during his 3-hour flight to Los Angeles were neatly organized in his leather briefcase beside him. For the 40-year-old successful businessman, this was a routine journey he made at least 3 times a week. As CEO of Wellington Holdings, he constantly traveled across the country managing real estate projects that had made him one of the youngest self-made millionaires in New York. His expensive Italian shoes gleamed, and his custom-tailored suit fit his athletic frame perfectly. He glanced at his Rolex, noting he had 30 minutes before boarding. He planned to use this time to finalize reports on the Tokyo project that would expand his empire internationally. The acquisition of prime commercial real estate in downtown Tokyo represented his biggest deal yet, potentially adding another 50 million to his already impressive portfolio. Marcus had built his fortune methodically over the past 15 years, starting with small residential properties in Queens and gradually working his way up to luxury developments in Manhattan. His success had come at a price, though he rarely allowed himself to dwell on what he had sacrificed to achieve it. The 60-hour workweeks, the constant travel, the inability to maintain meaningful relationships, all seemed like acceptable trade-offs for financial security and professional recognition. He had learned early that emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford in business. Every decision was calculated, every risk assessed, every relationship evaluated for its potential to advance his goals. This ruthless pragmatism had served him well in boardrooms and negotiations, earning him a reputation as someone who never let personal feelings interfere with profitable opportunities. The lounge was relatively quiet this Tuesday afternoon, filled mostly with business travelers like himself who treated air travel as mobile offices rather than leisure experiences. Marcus appreciated the controlled environment, the efficient service, and the absence of crying children or stressed families that populated the main terminal. Everything in his world was carefully curated to eliminate distractions and maximize productivity. As he scrolled through financial projections on his tablet, a familiar sound made him pause. Somewhere in the lounge, a woman was laughing, and the melody of that laughter sent an unexpected chill through his chest. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 10 years, but his body remembered it with disturbing clarity. His fingers stopped moving across the screen as he tried to convince himself he was imagining things. Marcus forced himself to continue reading, but his concentration was shattered. The laughter came again, warmer and more joyful than he remembered, followed by a child's giggle that made his head snap up involuntarily. He scanned the lounge with practiced efficiency, his business instincts automatically cataloging the other passengers and their activities. That's when he saw her. Isabella Rodriguez Wellington sat 30 feet away near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. She was more beautiful than Marcus remembered, her dark skin glowing with health and happiness, her black hair pulled back in an elegant bun that accentuated the graceful line of her neck. She wore a simple navy dress that suggested professional success without ostentation, and her posture radiated confidence and contentment. But it wasn't Isabella's presence that stopped Marcus's world from spinning. It was the 2 7-year-old boys sitting beside her, each holding what appeared to be a handheld gaming device. The twins were identical, with coffee-colored skin that perfectly blended Isabella's deep brown complexion with lighter tones that matched Marcus's own mixed heritage. Their hair was cut short in a style that emphasized their facial features that Marcus recognized with shocking certainty. The boy closest to the window had Marcus's distinctive cleft chin, the genetic marker that had been passed down through 3 generations of Wellington men. His brother displayed the same stubborn jawline that Marcus saw in his own mirror every morning, the same way of holding his shoulders that suggested quiet determination. When one of the boys looked up from his game to ask Isabella a question, Marcus saw his own piercing green eyes staring back across the lounge. More disturbing than their physical resemblance was the way both children tilted their heads when listening to their mother's response, a mannerism Marcus had unconsciously displayed since childhood. His own mother had often commented on it, saying he looked like a curious bird whenever he was processing new information. Watching these two unknown children exhibit the same behavior sent shockwaves through his carefully controlled emotional defenses. Marcus's tablet slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the marble floor beside his chair. The sound drew the attention of other passengers, but he barely noticed their curious glances. His entire focus was fixed on the impossible scene playing out before him. Isabella looked up at the noise, and for one heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the crowded lounge. Recognition flashed across Isabella's face, followed immediately by what looked like panic. She quickly gathered the boys closer to her, speaking to them in low, urgent tones that Marcus couldn't hear from his distance. The children obediently put away their games and sat up straighter, suddenly alert to some change in their environment that they didn't understand. Marcus found himself rising from his chair without conscious decision, his body moving independently of his shocked mind. 10 years of carefully suppressed memories came flooding back in vivid detail. Isabella's laugh during their early dating days, the way she used to tease him about his serious expression during business calls, the morning she had tearfully told him she was leaving because she couldn't compete with his obsession with success. Their marriage had lasted only 2 years, but they had been the happiest and most tumultuous years of Marcus's life. Isabella had challenged him in ways that both thrilled and terrified him, pushing him to consider priorities beyond financial accumulation and professional advancement. She had wanted children, a real home, a husband who was present for more than just the profitable moments of life. Marcus had convinced himself that he wasn't ready for those responsibilities, that building his business empire had to come first. He had promised Isabella that they would start a family once his company was more established, once the next big deal was completed, once he had achieved the level of success that would guarantee their future security. But there was always another deal, another opportunity, another reason to delay the personal happiness that Isabella craved. The final fight had been brutal, with accusations and tears that left both of them emotionally devastated. Isabella had accused him of loving his bank account more than his wife, of treating their marriage like a business arrangement that could be scheduled around more important priorities. Marcus had responded with cold logic, explaining that his work was ensuring their future comfort and that she was being unreasonable to expect him to sacrifice professional opportunities for romantic fantasies. Isabella had moved out the next day, taking nothing but her personal belongings and leaving behind the expensive jewelry and luxury items that Marcus had bought to compensate for his emotional absence. The divorce had been finalized 6 months later with minimal contact between them. Marcus had told himself he was relieved to eliminate the distraction and focus completely on building his empire. Now, staring at two children who were undeniably his sons, Marcus realized that Isabella's departure had been more complicated than he had understood at the time. The timeline was impossible to ignore, the boys' ages aligning perfectly with the period shortly after their separation. Isabella had been pregnant when she left him, carrying his children while he was consumed with merger negotiations and acquisition strategies. Marcus moved closer to where Isabella sat, his expensive leather shoes silent against the marble floor. She saw him approaching and instinctively drew the boys closer to her sides, her maternal protective instincts overriding any other considerations. The children looked up at him with curious expressions, noting his approach but showing no signs of recognition or fear. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking and undeniable. The boy on Isabella's left had Marcus's thick eyebrows and the same slight upturn at the corner of his mouth that suggested suppressed amusement. His brother displayed Marcus's habit of pressing his lips together when thinking, a nervous gesture that Marcus's business associates would have recognized immediately. Isabella rose gracefully from her seat, positioning herself between Marcus and the children with subtle but unmistakable protectiveness. She was smaller than Marcus remembered, but her posture radiated strength and determination that hadn't been there during their marriage. The young woman who had begged for his attention and time had transformed into someone who clearly no longer needed anyone's approval or support. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What could he say? How could he begin to address the magnitude of what he was seeing? Isabella waited with patience that suggested she had long ago made peace with this potential encounter, though her grip on the boy's shoulders remained firm. The twins looked between their mother and the tall stranger with growing curiosity. They were well-behaved children, clearly accustomed to traveling and comfortable in adult environments, but their resemblance to Marcus was causing other passengers to glance over with obvious interest. Several business travelers had recognized Marcus from financial magazines and news features, making the situation even more potentially explosive. Isabella finally broke the tense silence, her voice steady and controlled despite the obvious emotional charge of the moment. She addressed Marcus with formal politeness, acknowledging their shared past without revealing the deeper connections that bound them together. Her words were carefully chosen to protect the children from confusion while establishing clear boundaries about the interaction. Marcus listened to Isabella's calm explanation about their travel plans, noting that she spoke with the confidence of someone who had achieved her own professional success. She wasn't the dependent young wife he remembered, but a woman who had clearly built a satisfying life independently of his wealth or influence. The boys were traveling with her to visit family, she explained, a routine trip they made several times a year. The children remained quiet during this exchange, well-trained in airport behavior, but obviously aware that something significant was happening between their mother and this stranger. Marcus found himself studying their faces, cataloging every familiar feature and mannerism that connected them to his own genetic legacy. They were beautiful boys, healthy and confident, with bright eyes that suggested intelligence and curiosity. Marcus realized that Isabella had succeeded in creating exactly the family environment she had wanted during their marriage. The boys were clearly loved and secure, comfortable with their mother's attention and guidance in ways that spoke of stable, nurturing upbringing. Whatever financial struggles Isabella might have faced as a single mother, she had provided her sons with the emotional foundation that Marcus himself had never learned to value. The boarding announcement for Isabella's flight interrupted their awkward conversation, providing a natural endpoint to an encounter that could have stretched into hours of difficult revelations and recriminations. Isabella gathered the boys' belongings efficiently, preparing to leave without drama or extended goodbyes that might confuse the children. Marcus watched helplessly as his unknown sons collected their games and backpacks, following their mother's quiet instructions with the practiced ease of experienced travelers. They were polite children, raised to respect adult conversations even when they didn't understand the underlying tensions. Their calm acceptance of the situation spoke volumes about Isabella's parenting skills and the stability she had created for them. As Isabella prepared to board her flight, Marcus realized he was about to lose his chance to learn more about the children whose existence had just shattered his carefully constructed world. He hadn't asked their names, didn't know where they lived, had no information about their interests, achievements, or dreams. In 5 minutes, they would disappear into the anonymous crowd of travelers, and he might never see them again. The boys were already walking toward their gate when Marcus called out, his voice carrying more emotion than he had expressed in years of business negotiations. Isabella turned back, her expression guarded but not entirely unwelcoming. The children stopped beside her, looking back with the patient curiosity of youth faced with adult complications they couldn't comprehend. Marcus approached them one final time, his usual commanding presence reduced to uncertainty and regret. He found himself kneeling to the boys' eye level, studying their faces with desperate intensity as if he could memorize every detail in these last few moments. They looked back at him with interest rather than suspicion, their natural friendliness unaffected by the tension they could sense but not understand. Isabella allowed this brief interaction, perhaps recognizing that Marcus was experiencing genuine shock rather than calculating his next business move. The twins responded to his questions about their ages and interests with the enthusiasm of children happy to share information about their lives. They told him about their school, their favorite subjects, their plans for the summer vacation they were about to begin. Marcus learned that they were excellent students, both showing particular aptitude for mathematics and problem-solving that reminded him of his own academic strengths. They played soccer and took piano lessons, enjoyed reading adventure stories and building complicated structures with blocks and engineering toys. Their personalities were distinct despite their identical appearance, one more outgoing and talkative, while the other preferred to observe and analyze before speaking. The final boarding call forced an end to this brief window into lives that might have been part of Marcus's world under different circumstances. Isabella gathered her sons with gentle efficiency, preparing to continue their journey while leaving Marcus to process the implications of what he had discovered. The boys waved goodbye with the casual friendliness of childhood, unaware that they were leaving behind their biological father. Marcus remained in the lounge long after Isabella's flight had departed, staring out the window at planes taking off and landing, while his mind struggled to absorb the reality of his situation. He was a father, had been a father for 7 years without knowing it. Somewhere in the world, two children who shared his DNA were growing up without his influence, guidance, or support. The practical implications were staggering. Isabella had raised the boys alone, handling all the financial, emotional, and logistical challenges of single parenthood, while Marcus had been accumulating wealth and professional recognition. She had made school decisions, medical choices, and countless daily parenting judgments without his input or assistance. The boys had learned to walk, talk, read, and think without his presence or involvement. Marcus tried to calculate the cost of what he had missed. First steps, first words, bedtime stories, scraped knees, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, soccer games, school plays, and hundreds of other moments that formed the foundation of childhood memories. Isabella had experienced all of these milestones alone, while he had been focused on quarterly earnings and market expansions. More troubling was the realization that the boys seemed happy and well-adjusted without him. They hadn't appeared to lack anything essential, hadn't shown signs of insecurity or emotional deficit that might have justified his absence. Isabella had clearly provided them with everything they needed for healthy development, proving that his financial contributions weren't necessary for their welfare. The flight to Los Angeles that Marcus was supposed to board began its final boarding process, but he made no move toward the gate. The Tokyo deal that had seemed so critical that morning now appeared insignificant compared to the family crisis he was facing. For the first time in his professional life, Marcus found himself unable to prioritize business obligations over personal revelations. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, canceling not only the Los Angeles trip, but also the rest of his week's schedule. The confused questions from his team about his sudden unavailability went unanswered as Marcus tried to figure out what he should do next. He couldn't simply return to his normal routine, knowing that his sons existed somewhere beyond his reach. Marcus spent the rest of the day in the airport lounge, using his phone and laptop to conduct the most important research of his life. He hired private investigators to locate Isabella's current address, employment information, and details about the boys' school and activities. Within hours, he had compiled a comprehensive file about the family he had never known existed. Isabella lived in Portland, Oregon, where she worked as a successful architectural consultant specializing in sustainable building design. She owned a modest but comfortable home in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools and parks. The boys, named David and Daniel, were honor students who participated in various extracurricular activities and appeared to have busy, engaging lives. The investigation revealed that Isabella had never sought child support or attempted to contact Marcus about the boy's existence. She had built her career and raised her children independently, creating financial stability through her own professional achievements rather than relying on Marcus's wealth. This discovery both impressed and devastated Marcus, who realized that Isabella had succeeded in building the kind of meaningful life he had always claimed was impossible without first achieving financial security. By evening, Marcus had made a decision that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier. He canceled his remaining business commitments for the month and booked a flight to Portland, determined to understand the life his children were living and to figure out how he might become part of it. The Tokyo deal, his most ambitious project ever, would have to proceed without his direct involvement. The flight to Oregon gave Marcus time to confront emotions he had spent years suppressing. Regret flooded through him as he imagined the countless moments he had missed with David and Daniel. Anger followed, directed both at Isabella for not telling him about the pregnancy and at himself for creating a situation where she felt unable to share such crucial information. But underneath these immediate emotional reactions was a deeper realization that his entire value system had been fundamentally flawed. He had spent 15 years accumulating wealth and power under the assumption that financial success was the foundation of all other happiness. Now he was faced with evidence that the most important things in life, love, family, and meaningful relationships, had been developing outside his carefully controlled world while he was focused on profit margins and market share. Marcus arrived in Portland with no clear plan beyond the desire to see his sons again and to understand the life Isabella had built for them. He checked into a luxury hotel downtown, then spent hours driving through the city, trying to understand the environment where his children were growing up. Portland was nothing like New York, with its emphasis on outdoor activities, environmental consciousness, and work-life balance that Marcus had always dismissed as impractical idealism. The neighborhood where Isabella lived was tree-lined and quiet, filled with families and children playing in front yards that suggested community connections Marcus had never experienced. He parked across the street from their house, a charming craftsman-style home with a garden that showed evidence of careful attention and pride of ownership. Through the front windows, he could see warm lights and the kind of comfortable furnishings that suggested a home rather than just a place to sleep between business trips. Marcus watched as Isabella's car pulled into the driveway and David and Daniel tumbled out with the energy of children returning from an adventure. They were dressed in soccer uniforms and carried equipment bags, obviously returning from practice or a game. Isabella followed them with the efficient movements of a mother managing multiple schedules and responsibilities. Seeing his sons in their natural environment brought home the reality of what Marcus had lost and what Isabella had gained through their separation. The boys were clearly at home in their world, comfortable with routines and relationships that had developed over years of shared experiences. They had friends, teachers, coaches, and community connections that formed the foundation of their identities. Over the following days, Marcus learned more about his children by observing their lives from a distance. They walked to school each morning with neighborhood friends, participated in after-school activities with enthusiasm, and seemed to have the kind of secure, structured childhood that Marcus himself had never experienced. Isabella managed their schedules with skill that suggested years of practice, balancing her own professional responsibilities with the demands of active parenthood. Marcus realized that inserting himself into this established family dynamic would be complicated and potentially disruptive. David and Daniel had no knowledge of his existence and no apparent need for additional male influence in their lives. Isabella had created a support network that included friends, family, and community members who had earned their place in the boys' lives through consistent presence and care. The decision of how to proceed weighed heavily on Marcus as he extended his stay in Portland indefinitely. His business empire continued to function without his constant oversight, managed by competent associates who had been well-trained but never fully trusted with independent decision-making. The absence that would have been unthinkable a week earlier was proving surprisingly manageable, forcing Marcus to confront how much of his controlling behavior had been driven by ego rather than necessity. Marcus finally approached Isabella at her office, requesting a private meeting to discuss their complicated situation. Her initial weariness gave way to cautious willingness when she realized he wasn't making demands or threats, but genuinely seeking to understand how they might navigate their shared connection to David and Daniel. Their conversation lasted hours, covering 10 years of separate lives and the different paths they had chosen after their marriage ended. Isabella explained her decision not to contact Marcus about her pregnancy, describing her belief that he would view children as another distraction from his professional ambitions. She had wanted her sons to feel wanted and valued, not like obligations imposed on a reluctant father. Marcus listened without defensiveness, beginning to understand how his behavior during their marriage had created the situation they now faced. Isabella had protected their children from rejection by never giving him the opportunity to choose business over family again. Her decision had been based on intimate knowledge of his priorities and character, knowledge that Marcus now realized had been accurate. Isabella had built a successful career while raising David and Daniel, proving that the work-life balance Marcus had always claimed was impossible was actually achievable with different priorities and better time management. She had found professional fulfillment without sacrificing her role as an engaged present parent. Her architectural practice specialized in sustainable design projects that reflected her values while providing financial security for her family. The boys knew they had a father somewhere, Isabella explained, but she had told them only that he was a businessman who lived far away and wasn't part of their daily lives. She had never spoken negatively about Marcus, instead focusing on building a positive family identity that didn't depend on his presence or absence. David and Daniel had never expressed particular curiosity about meeting their father, apparently satisfied with the family structure they knew. Marcus found himself in the unfamiliar position of having to earn a place in lives that were complete without him. His wealth and business success, the tools he had always used to solve problems and open doors, were irrelevant to 7-year-old boys who judged people by their willingness to play games, tell stories, and show genuine interest in childish enthusiasms. Isabella agreed to introduce Marcus to David and Daniel as an old friend who had recently moved to Portland and wanted to get to know them. This approach would allow the boys to form their own opinions about Marcus without the pressure of understanding complicated adult relationships. If the interactions went well, Isabella would gradually reveal the truth about his identity as their father. The first meeting took place at a local park, where Isabella often brought the boys on weekend afternoons. Marcus arrived nervous in a way that no board meeting or high-stakes negotiation had ever made him feel. He had purchased age-appropriate gifts, researched topics that might interest 7-year-old boys, and tried to prepare for conversations that couldn't be controlled or predicted like business discussions. David and Daniel approached him with the friendly curiosity of children, accustomed to meeting new adults in their mother's social circle. They remembered him from the airport encounter, though they showed no particular significance to that memory. Isabella had clearly taught them to be polite and welcoming to visitors, skills that served them well in this unusual situation. Marcus found himself enchanted by his sons' personalities and perspectives. David was the more talkative twin, eager to share information about his favorite subjects and activities with anyone willing to listen. Daniel was quieter but equally intelligent, preferring to ask thoughtful questions and consider new information carefully before responding. Both boys demonstrated creativity, kindness, and confidence that spoke of excellent parenting and secure family relationships. The afternoon passed quickly as Marcus rediscovered the joy of seeing the world through children's eyes. David and Daniel showed him their favorite climbing tree, demonstrated soccer skills they had learned at practice, and peppered him with questions about his travels and work. They were interested in his stories about different cities and countries, though they seemed more impressed by details about local foods and interesting animals than by business achievements or financial success. Marcus realized that his sons were naturally curious and intelligent, qualities that he had always valued in business contexts, but had never considered in personal relationships. They asked insightful questions, made creative connections between different ideas, and approached new experiences with enthusiasm rather than caution. These were traits that could serve them well in any career path they might choose. But more importantly, they suggested emotional intelligence and social skills that would enrich their entire lives. As the weeks passed, Marcus became a regular presence in David and Daniel's lives, attending soccer games, helping with homework, and joining family activities with increasing frequency. Isabella maintained careful boundaries around their interactions, ensuring that the boys' routines and security weren't disrupted while allowing Marcus to develop genuine relationships with his children. The gradual revelation of Marcus's true identity was handled with the same thoughtful approach Isabella brought to all parenting decisions. She prepared David and Daniel for the information over several conversations, ensuring they understood that having a father didn't change their family structure or her role as their primary parent. The boys absorbed this news with the adaptability of childhood, more interested in how this information affected their daily lives than in the dramatic implications adults might attach to it. Marcus found himself fundamentally changed by the experience of knowing his children. The ruthless focus that had built his business empire began shifting toward priorities he had never considered important. He restructured his company to allow for more delegation and remote management, spending increasing amounts of time in Portland to be near David and Daniel. The boys' acceptance of him was gradual but genuine, based on his consistent presence and obvious care for their welfare, rather than on biological connections or financial contributions. Marcus learned to value their approval and affection as more meaningful than any professional recognition he had ever received. Making David laugh or earning Daniel's thoughtful nod of approval became more satisfying than closing million-dollar deals. Isabella watched this transformation with cautious optimism, recognizing changes in Marcus that suggested genuine growth rather than temporary enthusiasm. She had protected her sons from disappointment for 7 years, and she wasn't willing to risk their emotional security unless she was confident that Marcus's commitment was lasting and sincere. Marcus's relationship with Isabella evolved slowly from polite cooperation to genuine friendship built on shared love for their children. The romantic connection that had once burned between them was gone, replaced by mutual respect and partnership in raising David and Daniel. Isabella had built a life that didn't require Marcus's presence, but she was willing to include him as a beneficial addition rather than a necessary component. The successful integration of Marcus into his sons' lives required him to fundamentally reimagine his definition of success and achievement. The skills that had made him a millionaire, strategic thinking, long-term planning, and relentless focus, proved valuable in parenting contexts when applied with love rather than ambition. Marcus began using his resources to enhance David and Daniel's opportunities while respecting Isabella's role as their primary decision-maker. 6 months after that shocking encounter at JFK Airport, Marcus had established a new life pattern that balanced his business responsibilities with his commitment to being present for his children. He maintained a residence in Portland while continuing to oversee his New York-based company, proving that the work-life integration he had once claimed was impossible was actually achievable with different priorities. Marcus realized that his greatest success wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the trust and affection of two 7-year-old boys who had given him a second chance to be the man he should have been all along. The twins who had frozen him with shock in an airport lounge had ultimately freed him from a life that was financially rich but emotionally bankrupt, teaching him that true wealth came from relationships that money couldn't buy but time and love could build.